Great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here at the Pack Launch event. Today, we were hosting a session talking about the Saudi Arabia and Pakistan venture corridor. By way of introduction, my name is Bahoshy. I'm the founder of MAGNiTT, a venture data platform that covers all investments, research, analytics on the venture capital space on what we coin as emerging venture markets, which now covers Africa, the Middle East, Pakistan, and Turkey, as we continue to look at other areas. And one of the reasons that we do this is because it's very important to kind of see what the opportunities and the challenges are and differentiate them to more mature ecosystems like the US and Europe, which sometimes aren't quite comparable to what is happening in the regions that we're in. And specifically for today's discussion, which is focused on the corridor between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I know that there have been several other Pack Launch discussions with other countries also part of the emerging venture market space. But I think at large, before we jump into the panelists and I introduce them, I was keen on giving a little bit of context around some of the numbers of what we're seeing. I mean, for one, last year was a record year of investment, a record year of venture capital, a record year of liquidity events globally. Even in the region for the countries that I mentioned and the regions that I mentioned, it was a record year of capital deployment, the amount of deals, the exit activity that's happening, and even deep diving into both the Saudi Arabian venture capital space as well as the Pakistani venture capital space. We saw more investments and deals than any previous years. So as a context and backdrop of the discussion is extremely positive. And at MAGNiTT, we produce a report. So for anybody that's interested in the Saudi space with Saudi Venture Capital Company, last year in Saudi Arabia, we saw $548 million worth of capital that was deployed across 139 different companies. You only had to go back 5 years where it was less than 10x of that happening in the kingdom. So the acceleration that's happening is extremely positive. And in Q1, just the first 3 months of this year, we've already seen $256 million of investment across 43 deals. So nearly half the amount in just the first 3 months of the year. And in Pakistan as well, we ended 2021 from our reporting at 332 million and 78 deals. And in Q1, we've seen 143 million in 15 deals. So again, very positive signs for growth in both of the two ecosystems. But just a couple of other points that I think are interesting. I mean, obviously, we know the population of Pakistan is around 222 million. Saudi Arabia is 35 million. And yet CITC, one of the government entities, came out and said that internet penetration in the kingdom is at 98%, which is extremely high for anyone that's wanting to get into the tech space. And I managed to find another point, and I'll come on to ask the panelists their key points on this. A survey on online postal services and delivery applications, which was done by CITC, showed that 57% of the population in Saudi, so that 35 million, used e-commerce services, of which 75% were women in 2021, with an average spend of around 256 SAR. So that's around 256 dirhams, so less than $100 on average in the e-commerce space. And I think that there's a huge push that's happening. And for that, I think it's great for us to kind of discuss with the panelists that we have today, the opportunity of Saudi Arabia, the view of Pakistan from Saudi Arabia, the cross-pollination activity that's beginning to happen. And for that, I'd like to just introduce the four speakers that we have here. Amal Dokhan, who's the partner at Global 500 Global, who's actually based in Saudi Arabia. Khaled Talhouni, who is the managing partner of Nuwa Capital, who has one of their key LPs from Saudi, and he can speak a bit more about the mandate of the fund. And Talha Ansari, who is the co-founder of Retailo, which is a great example of a Pakistani company that has also looked to scale into Saudi Arabia, where I would love to get parts of his journey and why he did that and what some of the opportunities and the challenges were in that exercise. And welcome to all of you this evening, and thank you for making the time. As we kind of kick this off, let me just start with Amal. I mean, I think it's great seeing 500. We know the story of 500 Global. They have multiple funds, multiple geographies across all different emerging markets, doubling down in Saudi, also having made investments in Pakistan. I'm assuming that the majority of the people on this call are going to be interested from a Pakistani perspective into Saudi. For those that may not be familiar with the Saudi market, Can you give some of the reasons as to why the activity in Saudi Arabia has accelerated in the way that I kind of just mentioned a couple of minutes ago?
Thank you, Philip. And I think you've mentioned a lot of the reasons, of why this market have been evolving and moving really fast, towards accelerating tech activities. But I think one of the interesting part is, 500 Global always looks for talent and people that are looking to innovate and bring, something new to the table. And that's what drives any investor, honestly, after any market. Was really interested in the data you mentioned, the 35 million in population. And I found the data that 37% of those actually are under the age of 14, right? And those under the 25, is about 51%. So it will equate in above, if we go, more and more into the ones under 29, that will be a total of 80% under the age of 30. And I think that's a lot of minds and a lot of people that will be always looking into, the tech options and solutions. So why Saudi? There's definitely has been that acceleration to adopting, technological solutions, which allows more opportunities and possibilities, for the founders to actually release many solutions and, their ventures obviously to expand. There is high adoption for technology among, and across, all ages, obviously. The third thing, probably the movement of regulatory sectors. So there was a lot of reforms that happened in Saudi Arabia over the years, especially after 2016 with the launch of the Vision 2030, which is allowing a lot of the founders to also venture quickly within, a lot of activities. Quick example, fintech, Sama and the sandbox, where the startups are getting in, and building those regulations with, the regulatory aspect. So I think we can look at it in multiple views where all the pieces can come together. And that's what really makes our position, of launching an accelerator or launching a fund, in the region, and being in Saudi Arabia allows us to be the anchor to bring all of these startups that want to expand to the Saudi market. And at the same time will give us the eye, also for these companies that are here to venture into other places, be it, Pakistan and other parts of the region as well. So we want to play that, kind of a role where we accelerate, but we also connect and build those ecosystems together at the same time.
So Khaled, I'm going to jump on you, and we'll dig into a lot of the kind of that cross-pollination into a second. But I mean, from your experience with Wanda, who I know is very keen on understanding what was happening in Saudi and now with Nuwa, I mean, what has, from your perspective, been the big changes in the last 2-3 years, on top of what Amal has said, that you think has really made it an attractive market? Everyone says that you need to be operating in Saudi to be successful in the region. Why is that the case?
Well, I think, like, to kind of round out the context that you, both you and Amal had mentioned, the Saudi Arabia is the largest market, largest economy in the Middle East. So it has a kind of $1 trillion economy overall, and one of the highest GDP per capita in the world, really, especially on a purchasing power basis. So Saudi Arabia is really the driving economic engine of the Middle East, and the natural home for any company from anywhere really entering the region, Pakistan or otherwise, to kind of figure out how to unlock the Saudi opportunity. I think in the past couple of years, there's been a number of changes. I think that Amal alluded to in terms of the regulatory streamlining for operating in the kingdom. I think that's made a huge difference to early stage startups and tech companies wanting to kind of establish presence there. You see policymakers in the past 2-3 years really working very hard to kind of drive to position really Saudi as the keystone market, and to make it easier for companies to set up there. The other kind of new and exciting thing that's emerging is Saudi as the home of kind of like the regional IPO. So you're starting to see some much more activity on Tadawul, which is the main exchange in Saudi, as well as the sort of alternative exchange Nuwa, and really positioning as the home, the natural home for any company looking to go public in the region. And you're seeing the exchanges starting to kind of really go out and court early stage companies to come and list. And that's a game changer, I think, for tech companies. We've not had a natural path towards IPO for most tech companies, and I think this is a game changer for the region and only set to accelerate. Lastly, I think the Saudi government, through its different organs, has really pushed towards allocating capital towards the space in general, towards the tech space and the early stage space in general. And that has a huge knock-on effect, I think, as you make capital available, a considerable amount of capital available, then you start to see kind of positive externalities emerge from that.
Thanks. Talha, look, I think you have a very interesting perspective. For anybody on the call, do you mind just kind of summarizing what it is that you're doing when you started? But most importantly, what made you choose the decision to enter into the Saudi market as an expansion for your company?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. So Retailo by nature is a B2B business, right? And the mission that we have is to create a level playing field for everyone in the retail sector of Middle East. And this is what we are doing through technology. So the core customers that we have are the neighborhood stores that we see around ourselves. So we are creating a set of digital products and services for them in order to make them competitive with whatever the progress that we are seeing around us in general in the economy. Now, I think to your question, a lot has been covered by Amal and Khaled. Some of the things which I would be saying would be from the business perspective, but might be having a similar kind of a meaning to it. So for us, the why Saudi was the key focus area, because when you look around all the markets within our region, Saudi has this sweet combination of population density and GDP per capita, right? So if you compare it to Egypt or Pakistan, where one would be stronger than the other. So which essentially means it's the biggest economy in the region. Secondly, I think there has been extremely strong push from the government, as mentioned by the other participants as well, in terms of digitizing the economy. And whenever a market is going through a transformational phase, it's very natural that there are a lot of opportunities that it poses for young entrepreneurs or generally for people who believe in innovation to go for it. So that would be the second reason. And third would be slightly a newer angle to the whole equation would be the availability of relevant talent, right? So what we saw post Kareem and Souk, etc., we saw the first set of talent who was part of these organizations to come out and start their own startups, etc. So, and this is just like the start. I think going forward with the kind of activities that we are seeing around the different stages at which the companies are, I think more and more the talent base is now aware about what ESOP means, what equity means, why you have to come at a discount on your salary and compensation when you're joining a young startup. So I think that also has matured a lot. So for us, these were the three logical reasons of doing it. But in terms of software reason, I think given the last role in which I was in, the inspiration came from there when I was scaling the last mile delivery business for Kareem in the region.
Okay.
And when I interacted with this segment of neighborhood stores and cafes, I think the problem statement was quite clear to us.
So that's interesting. So you previously worked at Kareem, so you had this experience, or you'd seen this inspiration of the scalability across these markets. Can you just explain to me, where did you set up, and then when did you actually go and move into the Saudi market? For anybody that's interested, like how was that journey?
Yeah. So answering your first question first. So I have been part of the ecosystem for a good 10 years now. So I started off my journey with Rocket Internet, where the first 4 years of my professional journey started from. So I was leading Food Panda for Rocket Internet in Pakistan. So, and then consequently, I moved to Kareem in 2016, where I was director of operations for Saudi and Pakistan. Later to move to the central organization to manage the overall ride-hailing operations. The last project that I got was launching and scaling the last mile delivery business of Kareem post Uber's acquisition, because we were moving from a ride-hailing company to a super app platform. Now, to the second part of your question, so the idea was very clear in our mind, and that we are going after the regional TAM, and Saudi sits at the center of it, right? So something very unique and very aggressive that we did was we started building Riyadh and Karachi together. And there were many reasons behind that, but one of the important reasons was having technology built where the tech team can also experience what the product looks like, rather than having all the disadvantages of a distance that you usually experience in conventional scenarios. I think one of the things which, and we'll talk about it in the course of our conversation later on, between Rocket and Careem, I think both the companies had the DNA of scaling the companies regionally. So by the 2 seasons we had experienced, we knew the things that work out well and the things which we have to avoid, right? So there was a lot of baggage when we were doing this, and that's the reason why, despite initially there was a lot of feedback and criticism of why doing the 2 markets together, we were able to pull it off successfully. And now we are in 12 cities, 3 countries. We have launched UAE as well, but Saudi is the largest market for us, followed by Pakistan and UAE, and we intend to continue this journey forward.
Nice. I mean, so Khaled, I'm going to jump to you. I mean, since we started sharing data on Pakistan through MAGNiTT, and of course, many of our clients are Saudi, we started publishing it as part of our kind of annual reports and sharing it part of the paid reports. It's been fascinating whenever you go to events, speaking to clients, that they're all like, what's happening there? We weren't aware of what's happening in the Pakistani ecosystem, and whether it be government entities trying to track startups, GPs, ecosystem players and enablers, there seems to be this growing interest in the Pakistani ecosystem. What's your take on this, and what's your feedback been from the people that you're speaking to specifically about the opportunity that exists in Pakistan, either for Saudi startups and the ecosystem, or vice versa, attracting Pakistani startups to Saudi?
Yeah, so I think, like, the interest comes from the fact that, Pakistan is a major kind of economy that's starting to get unleashed. It's a huge wellspring of technical talent specifically. And I think in the past couple of years, 2-3 years, you've started to see the emergence of kind of scalable, sizable businesses. I think the Careem model is such a great blueprint for, building, big businesses of scale, leveraging both the kind of talent base, the depth of the talent base in Pakistan, but also the size of that kind of market, and then aggregating that with the depth, the commercial depth of the Saudi market and the GCC as a whole. So I think that's a great kind of blueprint for building large, scalable businesses in our region. I mean, you have to think about, like, our economies as a whole are not that big, but once you bring, the GCC plus Pakistan plus Egypt, then you have, a really interesting proposition in terms of scale. So I think a lot of that, a lot of kind of the interest that you're mentioning is driven by the Careem exit, the alumni of Careem like Talha, who come out of that. We were tracking about 150 companies that have been founded by Careem alumni in the past 2 years alone. And I think that has real power to it. That really kind of helps drive the development of an ecosystem, but also helps drive this sort of corridor between, Pakistan and the GCC, and specifically Saudi Arabia. So I think a lot of that is driven, a lot of the kind of interest and the growth of that market is driven by kind of what's been happening in the past couple of years in that respect. And I think only set to accelerate. There are long historic links between, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan that have never really materialized in terms of, like, Pakistani companies emerging, like entering Saudi, but that's starting to change, driven by, Retailo and by Careem and others like it. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this going forward.
Not just that, though, we're beginning to see what can we say? I mean, we say already scale is ultimately the most important thing. And historically, when we siloed MENA, we would see companies operating in Egypt, UAE, and Saudi. But take a trucker, for example, that acquired, based out of the UAE, moved headquarters to Saudi, also acquired a company in Pakistan. You just saw Sari make an acquisition in Egypt and make an investment in Jugnu in Pakistan as well. Are you going to anticipate that there's this continuation of either organic or inorganic activity driven across the Saudi and Pakistani market as they look to bridge two big markets together?
Well, it's critical. I mean, the only way to achieve, I think, like we mentioned, to achieve real scale is to aggregate those markets. I would argue even to add Turkey to that mix as well. So you'd add Turkey, GCC, Egypt, Pakistan. That becomes a really interesting economic unit. Each of these markets have their own idiosyncrasies. They're not exactly the same. Like they all have their different operating environments, different consumer preferences, different regulatory kind of setups. But that's the opportunity, because it's much easier to build homegrown businesses that understand the vagaries of those markets versus kind of having globals kind of enter. And that's how you kind of build a strong defensibility. Going forward, I think it's only set to increase. Again, like there's a blueprint, someone has done it. You know, I think Talha mentioned Souq before, which did focus GCC, but then had some back office in Pakistan as well. And I think that, after Kareem, you'll have more and more and more of that. Going forward, there is the one challenge of having kind of disparate economies is of disparate countries, that if you try to aggregate them into one big economic bloc, is that government policy may be a bit focused on being local versus regional. But I think as governments start to figure out that if we open it up for everyone, then it's a win-win situation for everyone. It's not really zero sum. If we kind of build fantastic businesses that scale and aggregate the wider economic bloc, then everybody wins really. So nobody is losing. So I think
that's extremely important, right? Opening up markets and scalability is key. And just Amal, I'm going to touch on this point because there's a few questions that are coming in, and people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And I want to be super transparent around this because it's always a little bit complicated. People assume there's a lot of capital in Saudi Arabia, and there is currently, given the different type of entities, whether it's SVC, Jeddah, the fund of funds that are being put into the different type of VCs, there is capital. But can you, for any Pakistani founder, explain some of the logistics of that? And what do I mean by that? Is there a need to have to locate in Saudi, i.e. if you're looking to raise funds from potentially Saudi-based venture capital or entities within the kingdom, is there a need to acknowledge the need to have to actually scale into the kingdom to get that funding? And it's not about getting that funding while operating in a different market.
So if we're speaking about the general funding scheme, it depends really on the thesis of the fund and who are the LPs, that are existent in that fund. Because some LPs, especially the ones that are governmental driven, have certain, allocations that need to go into the local economy, which makes a lot of sense. That's what should governments do in order to incentivize and encourage, investors to put money in, for the startups to even relocate. But it's not necessarily the case for the whole fund. You have the possibility to find opportunities regionally, and they can scale. And honestly, even in 500, when we look at the company, we never actually put that as a condition, for them to relocate. If it makes sense for them to stay in Egypt and really scale and then go to the rest of African continent, countries, then that would be it. It's just about us, I think, as fund managers and partners, to really balance, what you're looking at and build your strategy, and how are you going to allocate the funds within your portfolio, every time you're actually looking to invest. So that's definitely not a condition. I think the second point is for you to find, there's definitely liquidity, there's definitely the look out there, for all the talents. And if they're building good business models, if they are people that have experience, within the sectors, those are just attractive. And again, as you mentioned at the very beginning, Pakistan is becoming kind of, that big, place that has been unleashed. Everyone has curiosity. And again, even when we're recommending and talking about deals, people want to know what's happening in Pakistan, what are the types of deals, what are the sectors, and everyone is willing to look at it, which is the first step. that you need with any investment, you know, that they're willing to take the first meeting and to sit with the founders and really explore the possibilities. Now, what's the advantage if it makes sense for you to actually relocate? Then there's a lot of advantages in terms of facilitation of how to get into the kingdom, right? So I think an investor plays a huge role in terms of like figuring out what would be the shortcuts, you know, what would be the best way, what are the ministries, who are the key people. Like even for us as 500, we issue something called a recommendation letter for the Ministry of Investment, which allows a massive kind of discount on the setup fees, for example. So that's a highly technical thing, but it kind of makes a difference for any startup, especially at the pre-seed and seed stage. I think the second component is, you know, if they are looking to expand, it's good to have an investor in that market. It's good to have an investor that have grounds, that understands what it's the talent scheme, opens market to intros, understand the governmental and the private sector. So I think it's definitely not necessary for anyone who's looking to expand into the market, you know, and look into raising money from VCs that are existent here. But it's just about understanding really, you know, where those funds are allocating and when at what time, you know, and how to approach them. Strategy.
Makes sense. And I think that's extremely key, is that obviously if you can get a local partner that can support you. I have investors from Saudi that have been fundamental in opening doors when you scale into the country. It's just also making people be aware that you do need to do your due diligence as to whether you are raising funds. It's not necessarily to expand to another market. It tends to be to expand into that market. Talha, just jumping into you, I mean, for people that don't know how to access the Saudi market, I mean, Amal mentioned several key points around how you can get licenses and things. Are there any points that you can share that are potential challenges that a founder in Pakistan just needs to be aware of, or any tips that you can provide them to navigate entering Saudi as a potential market?
Perfect. So, Philip, before getting to the answer to that question, just wanted to share my opinion on a couple of things that were being discussed, right? So, I think one of the point on a lot of Saudi startups coming to Pakistan, or Pakistani startups getting into Saudi, in my opinion, it's going to be inevitable, and the reason for that is what Khaled touched upon, that none of the specific market, a particular market, is of the comparable size of Indonesia or India. So as soon as you get to the later stage in the thirst for more growth, you start looking outside. And in my opinion, this expansion from Saudi to Pakistan would be much earlier, and followed by startups going from Pakistan to Saudi. And the reason is very simple. There are more later stage companies in Saudi as compared to Pakistan. And in Pakistan, there are more number of early stage companies right now in terms of the VC journey. So, and that is what we are experiencing with the likes of Noon Academy, or be it Trucker, or be it Sari taking exposure into one of the company in Pakistan. So I think it's going to be inevitable. Secondly, there is this question, and I want to address this thing in a most transparent way as much as possible, about this whole perception of the founder to be based out of Saudi to do the business in Saudi. I think the answer is probably correct, right? But maybe the rationale or the place from where people think about this topic is not accurate, right? Saudi is like, it has its own dynamics, and especially when you are building a consumer-centric business, you have to really understand the market in a much deeper way. So the whole idea of sitting outside of Saudi and building a business in Saudi hasn't really worked out in the past, right? So maybe the presence of the founder is necessary and important from the perspective of building an amazing product for the people which they connect with, right? As compared to anything else. Now, moving to your question.
No, I think you make an excellent point. Unfortunately, too much of the time it's an imposition, whereas in the reality is, if the opportunity is big enough, it should just be a matter of fact that it makes sense for the business to grow. So I think you put it very well and eloquently. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I think one of the standard thing which you keep hearing it, but everyone needs to believe, is if you are building a good business, then you will find the investor to invest in that company from any part of the world, right? In our case, we have got the investors, most of the investors are the Valley-based investors. With, of course, you need a local Saudi investors to open up a lot of doors for you, right? Because of the network and relationship does and when it comes to even the Saudi investors, there are different types of investors, right? There are a lot of good family investor offices. There are good like VCs out there. So as soon as your purpose, what you are essentially looking to drive out of it is getting fulfilled, I don't think so it's like kind of a prereq or something. So just wanted to address that. Now, jumping to your question, I think my experience was amazing. With the caveat that I have operated 4 years in Saudi market. I have done deliveries myself in that market. So don't take this from me because I was there in the market building Kareem's business before doing this. But I was genuinely delighted with how Ministry of Investment Saudi Arabia, MISA, treated the whole process. Yani, we used to get a call every day, very supportive, identifying. Yani, one of the, let's say, one of the downside, for the lack of a better word, when you are in a market which is transforming very fast, of course, things takes time at every level of the process to get absorbed, right? Or people, the process getting used to it. So I think when we got to a point where there was a lot of municipality licenses, etc., this and that, I think MISA was one entity that was really proactively helping us in getting all that done. So our experience was amazing. I think this is something which in case of Pakistan, I think is still that is something which.
So just to share that MISA is the Ministry of Investments that has a specific team dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs set up with licensing and visas for access to the Saudi market. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
That's good.
Khaled, I'm going to jump to you quickly. For all of the founders that are here from Pakistan and looking to explore Saudi, is there a particular industry sector area that you think coming from Pakistan is an opportunity now, or is it the whole of the market? I mean, is there some hot sectors that you believe right now are ripe for companies to scale into Saudi Arabia from what you've been seeing?
Yeah, so I think my first kind of initial reaction is like it's quite open. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in general to kind of scale Saudi across different sectors. One thing that comes to mind, our first investment in Pakistan was in a company called Talha, which does basically like it's a B2B marketplace for agricultural products. And I think there's a big opportunity there within kind of food security into the kingdom. As you know, Saudi imports most of its most of its agricultural produce, and Pakistan does have a large agricultural sector. And I think figuring out how to kind of bridge those two markets is a unique opportunity. It really informed why our first investment in Pakistan from kind of Nuwa was in that segment. We were actively looking for something in kind of food security, agriculture, etc. So I think that specifically is a really interesting market for expansion into Saudi. I think anything that requires deep technical expertise as well, where I think there's a good opportunity to leverage, like I mentioned earlier, the very strong kind of technical talent in Pakistan. So any sector that is kind of deep into that becomes also particularly interesting. But generally, I think there's kind of room for Pakistani startups to kind of access Saudi and the GCC more broadly. I think it should be across the board, more or less.
Amal, you mentioned earlier the importance of talent. I've seen that it's always difficult to hire locally there if you don't have people on the ground. But do you have any tips or recommendations for any companies that are looking to hire? Should you be hiring Saudis? Is there Saudiization? Is there any requirements for any of these companies that need to be hiring locally, or can they import teams that come from other markets? I mean, any views or thoughts from the experience that you've seen with companies in your portfolio?
I mean, it goes back to really where the company is set up at the beginning, right? Where is this initial market that they are testing on? Where are they trying to really build their initial kind of tractions and all of that? And obviously, at the beginning, we just, push any founder to start where they are, where they're able to really figure out that there is a market they can test on and go on, and not to worry about all of these kind of requirements at the beginning, because they want to prove a concept, right? But as they go into scale, and I think Talha have mentioned, if you're looking at a particular market, you definitely have to be there, because your customer discovery at the beginning and understanding behaviors, you cannot be managing something overseas, right? Eventually, you may have technical teams that could be overseas, but the people that are in charge of the market, of the commercialization, of talking to customers, there is a bit of a kind of a uniqueness about the Saudi market. And I heard it from a lot of founders, especially if they're dealing, let's say, within as an SME sector, for example, they need a bit of facing time. They want to talk to people at the beginning. They don't want to rely solely only on digital kind of solutions. So I need to make sure that I show them that I understand that market, that I have people that can guide them, that maybe speak even a similar accent sometimes. So that's the time. I think it's all driven by the business at the beginning, and really what requires the success for the company and how it evolves. And then based on that, you really develop your own hiring. Now, in terms of the regulatory aspect of what the Ministry of Investments would require at the beginning, there's a bit of ease at the very beginning of the company, but as you grow, after a period of time, you definitely get kind of, the regulations of what other companies are going through. So there's certain requirements that grow with you in time, but you do have the grace at the beginning as you are incubated or as you are just entering the market. So there's a period of time that anybody who's interested, we're very happy to connect them as well, maybe offline later on, to how, the ministry is supporting in that. And to Talha's point, the ministry have created these tracks for companies that are really startup companies. So there's a bit of ease, around, the setup, around the requirements, around the people and all of these stuff. So I think, yeah, it's a bit easy, at the beginning. Now, is it easy to recruit and find talent? I think talent crisis is everywhere. It's not necessarily in one region. You always need to spend that extra effort and time to find the right fit culturally, technically, and at the same time in the place that you want it to be. But definitely there is a lot of talented Saudi, people that are actually graduating or coming from abroad, technically savvy. And a lot of the companies that have, especially the ones we have, with us, that are incubator and our accelerator, are hiring a lot of Saudi individuals. So part of what we do with the program is to support in that, because we build a lot of communities. So we avail these kind of meetups, we do recommendations, we reach out to a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, the short answer, you don't require that at the beginning. I think it has to be business driven at the beginning for the venture. But then definitely, as you grow as a company, there is those regulations which applies in so many countries, I believe, as well.
I'm just going, because there's a bunch of people asking questions about who the investors are in Saudi, what's the funding in Saudi. So I've just shared with you, obviously, to plug the MAGNiTT report. But what I'd be more interested in, Amal, is who are the key entities that you think people should be aware of in terms of government or SME? We mentioned MISA, which is the Ministry of Investment. Sorry. What are the other key entities or names that we could share here in the group that people should be conscious of to Google as landing programs, as co-working spaces, as entities that can support them in their kind of landing into Saudi Arabia?
That's a full webinar, Philip, of all the entities and the ecosystem players that we need to reach out to.
Seems like a good one to share on the Saudi-Pakistan corridor.
I'm happy to share. I mean, but the list will go on. Obviously, your starting point, I would say, if you're getting into, I'll give you an example, KAUST, when they launched their Taqaddam accelerator, they launched it on small scale, during the days when I used to work actually in KAUST, but now they're reaching out to the globe. So in their the recent actually cohort, they had 2 Pakistani companies that graduated, from their program, they got funding and all of that. So I think, I always say if it's at an early stage, you probably need to be more grounded, especially if you want to be in that market. So I would look for accelerators, incubators, that are available in the market to come and really help you to access that market. In terms of government entities, Ministry of Investments is your first step, because they connect you to all of these, to the Ministry of Commerce, to MCIT, to all of the other, which is the Ministry of Communication and Information. So I think the first point, Ministry of Investment, and then based on your business, if you are financial technology, you definitely need to go to SAMA. So there is the sandbox, and you need to understand the regulatory scheme. If you're an edtech company, you need to understand what Ministry of Education is requiring if you're going to target, the government. So I would say MISA can be the very good starting point. And then moving from that, there's all the cross sectors. The good thing that most of the ministries now have agents and people that deal with tech companies. So they can guide you basically to what is required, or if there is possibilities for any cross collaborations and that type of thing. So there's always an innovation or entrepreneurship department that actually receives all of this. So I would take it back to really what sector are you in and why are you looking into the Saudi market? I normally say, don't start the setup until you know where you are, because you don't want to go and change the activity. So we're going to go a bit technical here. There's so many factors and activities you need to get into. So you have to test first. A lot of companies test through other existing companies, do bunch of collaborations and partnerships until they figure out really where they want to go into the market. And then they go into the registration, because changing can be really lengthy at this time. Now, what should I go and whom should I go to? I'm truly delighted and happy to guide you to that, offline. So I'm going to leave my line, and really there's about 20 or 30
Perfect.
entities, Philip, as you know, that we can actually ask people
Perfect.
to go.
Thank you. Thank you. But I think it's important to share that so that at least people are aware. And on a similar but separate subject, Khaled, we've just been talking about Saudi, but it's very wrong to generalize a whole country. Again, are there specific hubs in the tech space that you recommend for a founder from Pakistan looking to enter? And Talha, maybe based on your experience as well. But Khaled, is there specific places that you say that you have to go to if you want to be operating, or at least to set up as your landing spot for the Saudi ecosystem?
Yeah, I think as is, Saudi is the largest economy. Within Saudi, the largest kind of economic bloc is probably Riyadh. And what we see is a lot of companies starting first in Riyadh and then going to the. So I would encourage anybody looking to scale to Saudi to land first in Riyadh, just because that's become the kind of main commercial driver in the country. And then I think you kind of expand outward. So the two other cities that go to in succession would be Jeddah and Dammam. Jeddah in the west and Dammam in the eastern province. They each have kind of their own kind of uniqueness. They all have their kind of quite different. Saudi, as you said, is a big country, and each of those kind of cities have their own kind of culture of their own business cultures, their own kind of business communities. So it's important to kind of understand that. I think beyond that, understanding the scale of Saudi is even beyond the three cities. There's kind of a whole layer of other cities that are 1 million plus in population that are definitely worth kind of growing to. But I think, you tackle the largest problem first, which is Riyadh, and then you kind of expand outwards from there. I would encourage like any kind of Pakistani founder to look at coming to Riyadh, spend time there, understand the market, and then kind of grow out from there.
Talha, anything else to add on top of that before I jump into some of the questions in the chat?
Probably I'm not the expert on this topic, but I can share my experience quickly. So since my other co-founder was McKinsey and I was at Kareem, so we had a network because of our organizations. So the first set of angels that we onboarded were from our respective organizations who were in the leadership position in the respective companies. And our first check came from 500 Global. So I think you should reach out to 500. They're always looking for good founders.
See, I like that. But Retailo and MAGNiTT, are great portfolio companies here with us in one call. So definitely.
Khaled, do you have any Pakistani or Saudi portfolio companies that you can recommend sharing insights from?
Yeah, I think like the one that we were in is Taza in Pakistan, and they're looking at kind of how they expand into Saudi as well. So like but it's early days. I think we're not there yet, but it's one thing that they're looking at.
I'm going to just take a couple of questions from the chat. Interesting one. I don't know whether it's specifically relevant, but I think it's interesting in the wider context of the region. Both Saudi and Pakistan have a perception issue in the West. How do we change that to attract even more capital? And I would say to further encourage international startups and interest in, I guess, the region, but specifically Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, and what's being done to change that perception from my perspective. I don't know who would like to take that.
I can take that.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Talha.
So, okay, I'll just keep it quick. So I think it always helps if you know someone who is in these Western markets, helping you and supporting you with talking to the investors, because that actually help in reducing the gap in the understanding with respect to the local market. Because it's always there's a lot of like gap and distance in terms of how the West perceive generally this region. So it's great if you can find someone who can represent the region for you in those Western markets with all the passion and everything on your behalf, if you find someone. But that's my short answer.
Khaled, Amal, anything to add?
Maybe another component. I mean, what's happening again? Saudi in a certain period of time, was not known, for tech companies. Now you're seeing a lot of these technology companies that are receiving international funding, like SoftBanks, and a bit of attention from the others as well. So I think it's about, there's a role for the local investors as well in promoting these companies and building those bridges and reaching out and really showing that potential. So I do really see this as a very big component. Another role is where the government is playing about these reforms and going publicly announcing all the changes and attracting and really showing it in action, and on the ground, that this is not just, something that we're saying. Actually, founders are moving, they are establishing businesses, they are in operations. So again, promoting and telling these stories are very important. And I think the third component is building bridges, like what's happening in this call. So again, telling, other communities between one country and another about the things that are happening, founders connecting with each other is definitely one of the biggest things that I've seen work really well. And that tells the best story to the investors, and that story will carry, forward. And I think going maybe again, the reports, which is the indexes, again, MAGNiTT's role, I'm not just saying that for you, Philip, but the reports that have been published have actually created a lot of this visibility where people started to wonder, are these numbers there? How do we look into that? And one example, maybe I'll say personally, we receive a lot of calls, even in 500 or myself personally sometimes, they're asking about how is it investing there, or how was your experience? What type of companies are you seeing? So I think it is happening, but it's everybody's role within the ecosystem is just to play that kind of advocacy and really telling that real story about what's happening on the ground.
Yep. I mean, I'm a firm believer that success breeds success, and the more success that comes out of the region will then get more people interested in what's happening in the region. And I'm sure that we could talk about that from a wider region perspective, but it's well on its way for seeing these success stories coming out of the region. There's a question here about female entrepreneurship. It's a challenge, but are we seeing more female entrepreneurs in Saudi, and how to promote more female engagement? I don't know who would like to take that.
Happening, Philip. I mean, I'm happy for everyone else, but again, 30% of our portfolio is female company-led, right, in 500 global. So if we look at Saudi as well, in particular, there was actually a report, I don't really have the data in mind, but I recently hosted a panel where actually they said that the number of female-led companies and the percentage in Saudi is higher than the global actually standard. So we're seeing a lot of females actually that are joining the forces. They're leading the way. There's a recent round that's actually being led and announced recently, gathering. And, there is more and more that we'll be seeing. Again, it goes back to, the success factor of promoting those female founders. And I think talent do exist. I think the market is actually supportive. There's no differentiation between, the founders at this stage. So there's definitely a lot of, kind of acceleration when it comes to seeing that in the market.
Cool. There's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to fire shoot them one by one. What do the panelists think about valuations in the region, and are they unrealistic? Open question.
I'll jump into that one. So valuation, I think, is, like just the one thing that I think people forget is there is no kind of objective valuation. Valuation is a function of what someone is willing to sell stock at, or and what someone is willing to buy at. So the market changes depending on perception. I think in our part of the world, there has been historically past kind of year, 18 months, very strong appreciation in the value of assets of companies, especially at the later stages. I think the danger with our markets is that, again, back to aggregate market size, the dynamic is not the same as, just being kind of realistic. The dynamic is not the same as in developed markets like in Silicon Valley, because in the Bay Area, you're building companies that are first serving the US, which is the largest, economy in the world, but then also kind of goes globally. Here, we're really solving for kind of local problems and building local champions. Really, very few will go global, very notable exceptions, but generally it's kind of for a local consumption, which means there's a sort of natural cap on the size to which companies can grow. So what that means for valuation is if you're entering the late stage of Series B, Series C, whatever, if there's a contraction in multiples, even if you end up with a great company that's succeeding, that works, its business model is validated, if there's just a small change in kind of valuation metrics for whatever reason, then as an investor you may not end up making money. And then also for the founders, you may have priced yourself out of the market, meaning you kind of like raised it too high around valuation in the prior round, and then as you come to raise more capital, you're sort of totally on the wrong end of the stick. And like doing down rounds, it's people would rather not just do a round than do a down round because it's very complicated and a headache. So I think that's something to be kind of aware of. At the early stage, I would say seed through Series A, not an issue. Once you start pushing $150, $200 million valuations, it starts becoming a problem.
And are we realistically actually going to see more IPOs coming out of Saudi after the Jahiz one that we've already seen? And is that a one-off, or is this going to continue into the months and years ahead?
No, I think absolutely. I can see how the regulator is deeply engaged in kind of courting tech companies. Also, you see that there is very strong institutional and retail demand for companies, not just in tech, but across the board, for Saudi companies, for really regional companies that have not had a path, right? And now that kind of there's been some, the regulator has evolved a bit, the exchanges. I think the only kind of market with a lot of liquidity and depth and volume in the region is obviously like is in Saudi, and it's only natural that kind of like our kind of regional tech champions will land there. And we know the regulator's pushing for it. We know there's retail and institutional investor demand. With all the stuff happening in, I think one notable thing is with the Russia-Ukraine situation. Russia used to be the largest contributor to the MSCI index, the Emerging Market Public Markets Index. Now that it's off, the next largest recipient will be Saudi, as having a strong kind of national balance sheet backed by oil and gas and a large growing population, young population, as Amal mentioned, and growing economy. And so I think you'll see a lot of global flow of capital to also regional exchange the Saudi exchange, and that needs a home. And that home, I think, will be found in what are the most vibrant companies that are emerging in the region. You'll see a lot of tech companies float there.
Technical question.
One word, just a quick, note on that. Just to Khaled's point, since Jahids, have gone through the process, the secondary market or NMO have been even easing and revising actually these processes to make it even easier for the others to come and list and make it more transparent, for the companies to come. So there's encouragement, and there's few companies that are already in the making, to be announced very soon. So definitely, I think this is something that we're all waiting for, and it's gonna, as Khaled said, give more trust, towards exits and seeing more IPOs as well.
Thank you. Technical question. I don't actually know the answer myself. If anyone can answer, foreign ownership in Saudi, can you have 100% foreign ownership of local companies, or is that requiring a local partner?
You can.
Yeah.
Short answer, you can.
Yeah, they changed the rules recently.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. How do you project the startup ecosystem in Saudi Arabia developing in the next 10 years? Is a question, not mine, but I should give an answer, but I leave you guys to answer that.
Upwards and onwards, I think all three of us here are, all four of us are, very long and deep into like the startup ecosystem generally. So we all have to believe that it's gonna, change by an order of magnitude in a positive sense, in the same way it has over the past 3 years. So if I go back 3 or 5 years and compare to where we are today, I mean, it's just a huge paradigm shift. Take today and extrapolate forward, I think at the same momentum, same trajectory, it could only be positive, hopefully.
I totally agree. I mean, we've been in this, since 2013. And again, looking at the acceleration over the years, the increased number of investors, the increased number of founders, the speed of regulatory change, and again, go back, to all the pieces together, it feels is going into that kind of trajectory. And your reports will reflect that, obviously. But, it would be great also to hear from Talha as a founder, as well, how you're seeing that. But obviously, yes, full belief, in where the ecosystem is going.
No, I'll keep it quick. I think so. What we already have started experiencing this in terms like the digitization, in terms of e-invoicing, etc. So what we are seeing is really what we are doing and how government is trying to move forward is complementing each other. And also like from Saudization perspective as well, I think more and more of these tech solutions are going to find their feet as in relevant. So we are optimistic. Just to let you know, by the way, if you are a founder looking to get into Riyadh, probably you will find the most difficult thing is getting a house on rental right now.
Rent.
So it's the fastest expanding city in our region right now.
And I'm just going to add personally that for those that are unaware of Riyadh and have never been there, the rate of change of what's happening in Riyadh is remarkable. And it is surprising how much you can enjoy doing things in Riyadh at a scale which, as a consultant who was there 12 years ago, wasn't necessarily the case. But now it is completely changing with so many opportunities of things to do there. So, and I believe it's easy for you to be able to travel there and go with visas. I don't know what the situation for Pakistan is, but to be able to actually do online visas, to be able to travel, whether it's for a LEAP conference, whether it's a GEC event, or whether it's a startup event. Conscious of time, I want to ask a question to all three of you with one answer. Going back to the subject matter of this call, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia corridor. What one thing, government, private, in general, could be done to further accelerate the cross-pollination between the two geographies? And let's make it short-term, over the next 6 months, that would really spark further interest and awareness of the two ecosystems. Let's go with Khaled, Talha, Amal.
Yeah, I think one thing we've not had, at least to my mind, we've not had like a focused Saudi-Pakistan kind of investment event, and I think that would be really interesting to host, one in Riyadh and one in Pakistan, either in kind of Karachi or Lahore. I think that would make like and kind of to bring those two kind of ecosystems together, specifically focused on kind of cross-pollinating them. I think that could be a really interesting dynamic, and also inviting kind of companies that are operating in both markets to talk about their experiences to kind of both sets of audiences. That's what I would like, I think, love to see, and I think something that whether it's kind of government or private businesses can help arrange. I think that'd be great.
I'm going to just jump in there because this is a recurring theme that I've heard many times, and I'm not going to take credit for it, but I'm not going to share who said it, because it was a very big startup founder who was asked this question of what more could government do to support startups. And he says, when you go to places like the US or other geographies, the foreign office or the ministry physically take companies from geographies to another one to meet their counterparts in those geographies. And I always say, as VCs lobbying for your portfolio companies, how can you take, it doesn't need to be the whole portfolio company, but working with the government to almost take a trade delegation to open doors, because we've already said the more examples that we see of this happening. So this is an open invitation for the people on Pack Launch to support Saudi startups going to Pakistan. And conversely, how can you do a trade delegation of taking Pakistani startups to Saudi Arabia and almost doing a roadshow of the ecosystem to help facilitate it? So basically taking a step further from what Khaled's saying as a conference to actually physically take certain winners or certain companies to do that. Talha.
Yeah, quickly, on the similar lines as Khaled, I think that right now the money that is flowing into Pakistan, it's largely coming from the Western markets. So I think we already know that both the governments work closely, be it the state bank governors or the foreign offices, etc. So I think a lot can be done in terms of introducing fifth largest market in terms of population towards the Saudi investors as well. Other things will follow naturally, right? So that is something which no one can stop. That's going to happen, right? The startups from Saudi coming into Pakistan and Pakistan going to Saudi. But there's a slight lag between the traction that Pakistan is receiving from the external world and from the Middle East. So I think that needs to be bridged.
And Amal.
Yeah, adding to what Khaled and Talha, probably more about, talent visas, availing access for people to be present in the place, to live, to practice business, to test, and to do all of that. And I think that can be a first starting point, for any country, basically to allow people to feel that they are home, right? And they're building a business to last and they want to stay there. So hopefully we'll see more of those reforms that will allow startups to do those kind of cross activities.
Great. Well, there we go. We're 2 minutes over, but thank you very much for all of your time. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today. I have shared in the chat the link. I think, Amal, if you promise to share your email address for anybody to reach out. I appreciate your time and effort this evening, and hopefully for anyone that's coming to the UAE or going to Saudi Arabia, there tends to be several events that get shared, whether it's through MAGNiTT, whether it's through the different press entities of what's happening there. I strongly encourage you, if you're able to get a visa, go and check it out. The best way to engage with the local ecosystem is to go and meet, and hopefully vice versa. We see some people coming from Saudi going to Pakistan as well to understand the opportunity. But thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you all very soon. And Khaled, I'll probably bump into you tomorrow at the office.
Yep, awesome. All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.